A flawless quartz skull stares from behind museum glass. Its surface captures the light and seems to hold a secret. Are you looking at a sacred relic from a forgotten world, or one of the most beautiful hoaxes ever created? This is the enduring enigma of the crystal skulls. We are beginning a deep investigation, a journey that will weave together forgotten history, cutting-edge forensic science, and the powerful human need for mystery. By the end, you will possess the definitive evidence that separates ancient legend from modern fabrication. We will uncover who really made these objects and why their true story is perhaps more fascinating than the myth. What is it about a human skull carved in crystal that captivates us so completely? That hypnotic gaze speaks directly to our deepest fascinations with life, death, and the unknown. The skull itself is a universal symbol, a reminder of our own mortality, yet rendered here in a material believed to possess supernatural properties. Crystal is not just beautiful, it is, in many spiritual traditions, a conduit for energy and ancient wisdom. Combine these elements and you have an object that feels like a key waiting for the right lock. This allure was supercharged for millions by a single cinematic adventure. When Indiana Jones raced against Soviet agents to find a crystal skull in 2008, the public imagination was given a blueprint. The film presented the skull not as mere artifact, but as a powerful relic of extraterrestrial origin, directly linking it to theories of lost civilizations and otherworldly contact. Suddenly, the idea that these objects were ancient, mystical, and profoundly important became a mainstream fantasy. This pop culture moment cemented a romantic narrative, one far more exciting than a museum label. It suggested the skulls were remnants of Atlantis or the mythical land of Lemuria, crafted by advanced beings whose technology we cannot comprehend. They became seen as data storage devices, psychic amplifiers, or tools for prophecy. The flawless perfection of the most famous skulls, like the Mitchell-Hedges example, feeds this fire. How could a primitive culture without modern tools create something so immaculate? The answer for many was simple: they could not. Therefore, the creators must have been more advanced, perhaps not even of this earth. This is the powerful cocktail that makes the crystal skull phenomenon so enduring. It blends breathtaking artistry with the seductive thrill of forbidden history, wrapping it all in a glittering package of pure quartz. We want them to be real, to be proof of something greater than the dry pages of orthodox archaeology. But before we can believe, we must first investigate, and that investigation begins not in the realm of legend, but in the tangible world of museums, collectors, and a very specific moment in history. Our investigation narrows its focus to 4 legendary objects, the crystal skulls that stand at the very heart of this mystery. Each one carries a story, a distinct personality, and a set of clues that will become critical to our final verdict. First, and perhaps most famous, is the Mitchell-Hedges skull. This is the star of the show, a life-sized carving of breathtaking clarity in rock crystal. Its most distinctive feature is a perfectly fitted, detachable lower jaw, an engineering marvel that suggests incredible craftsmanship. The story of its discovery is pure adventure, recounted by explorer F. Mitchell-Hedges' adopted daughter, Anna. She claimed that on her 17th birthday in 1924, while exploring the ancient Maya city of Lubonton in Belize, she saw a flash of sunlight in the ruins and unearthed the magnificent skull herself. It is a story of destiny, a perfect artifact found on a perfect day, a narrative that has fueled its legendary status for decades. Then we have a pair of skulls connected by a single, shadowy figure. Both the British Museum skull in London and the skull at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris passed through the hands of a 19th-century French antiquities dealer named Eugène Bobin. The British Museum skull is smaller than the Mitchell-Hedges, carved from a slightly cloudy piece of quartz. Bourbon initially tried to sell it to Mexico's National Museum as an ancient Aztec artifact, a claim they rejected. He eventually sold it to Tiffany and Company in New York, who then sold it to the British Museum. Its Parisian counterpart shares a similarly murky provenance, also acquired by Bourbon. These twins tell a story not of jungle discovery, but of the bustling 19th century market for curiosities. Finally, there is the giant, the Smithsonian skull. Anonymously mailed to the museum in 1992, it is a massive, milky block of cloudy quartz weighing over 30 pounds and standing nearly 10 inches high. Unlike the others, it arrived with an unsigned note claiming it was an Aztec relic from the reign of Emperor Maximilian in the 1860s. Its sheer size and crude, almost grimacing features set it apart, a haunting and bulky enigma that seemed to dare experts to explain it. Here they are, our 4 key suspects. 1. A glittering prize from a lost city. 2. Elegant artifacts from a dealer's catalog. And 1. An ominous giant sent through the mail. Their stories could not be more different, yet they are all bound by the same mesmerizing material and the same profound question: are any of them truly ancient? To find out, we must move from their captivating legends to the cold, hard evidence of the tool marks left upon them. The legend of the Mitchell Hedges skull is a story told with cinematic flair, a tale where destiny and archaeology intertwine. Anna Mitchell Hedges recounted that pivotal moment throughout her life with unwavering conviction. As a teenager on an expedition with her adoptive father, the flamboyant British adventurer F. Mitchell Hedges, she said the ancient Maya city of Lubonton revealed its greatest secret just for her. On the afternoon of her 17th birthday, in the year 1924, a glint of sunlight caught her eye deep within a temple ruin. Brushing away the centuries of dirt and debris, her fingers touched the cool, polished surface of crystal. She lifted not just a carved object, but a masterpiece complete with its perfectly articulated jaw. It was, in her telling, a miraculous birthday gift from the past itself. Anna later wove an even darker thread into this narrative, calling it the Skull of Doom. She claimed it held mystical powers, that it could will death, and that ancient priests used it in rituals to focus their thoughts. This powerful combination of personal discovery and supernatural lore made the skull irresistible. It was not just an artifact, it was a character in its own epic story, a glittering protagonist with a mysterious past and dangerous abilities. Yet, when historians began to trace the paper trail, a very different and far more mundane story emerged. There is no mention of this extraordinary find in F. Mitchell Hedges' own detailed writings about the Lubonton expedition. No expedition photographs show it. The first public appearance of the skull, in fact, occurs nearly 2 decades later. Records show that in 1943, F. Mitchell Hedges purchased a crystal skull from the famed auction house Sotheby's in London for a modest sum. The seller was none other than his friend and fellow art collector, Sidney Burney. This documented transaction sits in stark, quiet contradiction to the jungle discovery tale. So we are left with 2 competing truths. One is emotional, a memory of sunlight on crystal in a lost city, passed down through a lifetime. The other is ink on a sales ledger, a line item in an auction catalog. This fundamental conflict is the perfect starting point for our investigation because it forces a critical question. If the origin story is so easily challenged, what does the object itself have to say? The skull's physical body must hold the evidence, and to find it, we need to learn the language of the tools that shaped it. That documented auction record hangs in the air, a silent challenge to the romantic legend. It forces us to turn away from the story and toward the object itself, to interrogate the physical evidence with a detective's eye. The Mitchell Hedges skull is, without question, a masterpiece of carving. It is life-sized, hauntingly realistic, and sculpted from a single, flawless block of clear rock crystal. Its most famous feature, the separate lower jaw, is a marvel of engineering. It hangs perfectly balanced on polished pivots, moving with a silent, seamless grace that feels almost organic. When you look at it, the craftsmanship is so immaculate, so precise, that it seems to defy its own existence. This perfection is the foundation of the ancient mystery argument. How could a pre-Columbian culture, even a highly skilled one like the Maya or Aztec, have achieved this? They worked primarily with stone tools and simple abrasives, creating such a complex, symmetrical form from quartz, one of the hardest minerals on Earth, would have been a monumental, perhaps impossible, task. The crystal would have shattered under the percussive blows of a hammerstone. The intricate details, like the delicate teeth and the smooth orbital sockets, seem to demand the controlled, rotary power of a modern diamond-tipped tool. For believers, this disconnect is proof. The skull must be the product of a lost civilization like Atlantis that possessed technology we no longer understand, or perhaps even an otherworldly artistry. The skull's very beauty becomes its own argument for antiquity. Skeptics, however, look at that same breathtaking precision and see something entirely different. They see the unmistakable signature of 19th-century lapidary technology. By the 1800s, European and American workshops had mastered quartz carving using foot-powered or later steam-powered wheels, coated with industrial diamonds and other advanced abrasives. This technology allowed artisans to cut, grind, and polish crystal with a control and speed unknown to ancient cultures. A master carver of that era, working patiently for months or even years, could indeed produce an object of such flawless symmetry and optical clarity. The skeptics propose a simple, if less thrilling, hypothesis. The Mitchell-Hedges skull is not a relic from a lost world, but a stunning piece of Victorian-era art, possibly created as a curiosity for the lucrative collector's market. So we are at an impasse, a battle of interpretations fought over the same glittering surface. One side sees impossible ancient skill, the other sees identifiable modern technique. To break this stalemate, we need more than opinion. We need to ask the crystal itself what happened, to examine it under a microscope and listen for the faint, lasting whispers of the tools that shaped it. The paper trail leads us to a single, fascinating man in a dusty Mexico City shop. His name was Eugene Bobin, a French antiquities dealer whose life and career form the critical link between the glittering skulls and their shadowy past. Bobin was not a tomb raider or a mystic. He was a businessman, an expert who built his reputation in the 1860s and 70s, supplying what he claimed were genuine pre-Columbian artifacts to the growing museums and wealthy collectors of Europe and America. He operated at the very center of a booming market, a time when fascination with ancient Mesoamerican cultures was at a peak, and the demand for exotic treasures far outstripped the supply of legitimate finds. This environment was a perfect incubator for skilled forgeries. Local artisans, recognizing the lucrative opportunity, began creating new objects in ancient styles, using traditional materials but often with telltale signs of modern tools. Bobin, the respected dealer, became a central conduit for these pieces, knowingly or unknowingly placing them into the world's most prestigious collections. It is through his hands that both the British Museum skull and the skull now in Paris traveled. He first offered the British Museum skull to Mexico's National Museum, presenting it as a fearsome Aztec relic. The Mexican experts, however, were suspicious and refused to buy it. Undeterred, Bobin took it to New York, where the luxury retailer Tiffany & Company purchased it, later selling it to the British Museum. The Paris skull followed a similar path, another artifact with a provenance that begins and essentially ends with Bobin's inventory. This pattern is crucial. It does not necessarily make Bobin a villainous master forger, but it absolutely positions him as the key node in a murky network of supply. He existed at the precise intersection of genuine archaeological discovery and the commercial creation of curiosities. In his world, an object's value was determined not just by its age, but by its ability to captivate a buyer's imagination, to tell a compelling story of bloodthirsty gods and lost empires. A flawless crystal skull, whispering of ritual and mystery, would have been the ultimate commodity. So the question shifts. We are no longer just asking if a skull is ancient. We are asking if it is a product of this specific 19th century ecosystem, a beautiful object born from the marriage of skilled Mexican craftsmanship and European romantic demand. To answer that, we must move from the ledgers of history to the laboratory, where light and magnification can reveal secrets the naked eye can never see. Even in the 1930s, long before Indiana Jones was a gleam in a screenwriter's eye, the experts at the British Museum were quietly raising their eyebrows. The beautiful crystal skull in their collection, the one purchased from Tiffany and Company, was starting to look less like an ancient god and more like a modern enigma. Curators began to examine it not with wonder but with the meticulous eye of a detective at a crime scene. Their first clue was the skull's overall aesthetic. It simply did not look right. Authentic Aztec and other Mesoamerican stone carvings have a very specific, recognizable style. They are often powerful, symbolic, and stylized, with features exaggerated for ritual impact. The British Museum skull, by contrast, possessed an almost clinical realism, a smooth, idealized form that felt more at home in a European anatomical study than in a temple of the feathered serpent. It was a beautiful object, but its beauty seemed to speak a different artistic language. The second and far more damning clue was found under a magnifying glass. When they studied the surface of the quartz, they spotted the faintest traces left behind by the tools that shaped it. These were not the random, multidirectional scratches and gouges one would expect from hand-held stone tools or even simple sand abrasives used in ancient times. Instead, they saw something far more precise: parallel, perfectly straight grooves. This pattern is the unmistakable fingerprint of a rotating wheel. A lapidary artist in a 19th century workshop would have used a foot pedal or later a steam-powered wheel, its edge coated with diamond dust to grind and shape the hard crystal. With each rotation, the wheel leaves behind these consistent linear marks, a signature that ancient technology simply could not replicate. It was physical evidence etched permanently into the crystal itself. Faced with this mounting evidence, the museum made a quiet but monumental decision. They did not issue a press release or create a scandal. They simply changed the label. The skull was officially reclassified. It was no longer listed as an Aztec artifact. Its description was amended to state it was probably European in origin, likely dating from the 19th century. This was a seismic shift in the official story. It meant that one of the world's most respected institutions had, based on careful observation, concluded that this iconic object was not a relic of a lost civilization, but a stunning piece of more recent artistry. This early verdict set a powerful precedent. It established a baseline of scientific skepticism that would hang over every other crystal skull that emerged. If the British Museum's own skull was a modern creation, what did that say about all the others? The investigation had officially begun, and the first major piece of evidence pointed squarely toward fabrication. Yet the most famous skull of all, the Mitchell Hedges, still glittered with its perfect, unchallenged legend. To test that legend, science would need far more powerful tools than a simple magnifying glass. While museums quietly revised their labels, a very different kind of awakening was happening outside their walls. The 1960s and 70s counterculture, with its deep distrust of established institutions and its hunger for spiritual alternatives, found a perfect symbol in the crystal skulls. Here were objects seemingly rejected by mainstream archaeology, which only made them more attractive. They were blank slates of crystal, ready to be inscribed with a new, more mystical mythology. The skulls were reborn not as artifacts but as oracles. A key figure in this transformation was a woman known as Star John, a psychic channeler who claimed the Mitchell-Hedges skull spoke to her. She reported that the skull revealed its true name, Max, and its purpose as a supercomputer from the lost city of Atlantis. According to these channeled messages, the skull was not merely carved but grown with advanced technology, and it contained the entire wisdom of that fallen civilization. It was a data storage device of pure crystal, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to access its files. This idea was electrifying. It married ancient legend with a then-futuristic concept of crystal computing, offering a narrative far more compelling than a debate over tool marks. Author Richard Garvin further popularized these ideas in his 1973 book, The Crystal Skull, presenting the Mitchell-Hedges artifact as a profound enigma that science could not explain, thereby implying its supernatural origins must be true. From these seeds grew an elaborate modern legend, one that completely detached the skulls from any earthly archaeology. This was the story of the 13 crystal skulls. According to this burgeoning myth, the skulls were created by the ancient inhabitants of Atlantis, or perhaps even extraterrestrials. They were scattered across the globe for safekeeping, and they held collective knowledge critical for humanity's survival. The prophecy stated that one day, when the world stood on the brink of great crisis, all 13 original skulls would be rediscovered and brought together. This reunion would somehow trigger a global awakening, a shift in human consciousness that would avert catastrophe and usher in a new age of peace. It was a powerful, archetypal tale, a quest for scattered pieces of a puzzle that could save the world. This narrative did something brilliant. It made every crystal skull that surfaced, regardless of its actual quality or provenance, a potential candidate for being one of the sacred 13. It created a community of seekers and believers, united by a spiritual mission rather than historical inquiry. The skulls were no longer studied, they were communed with. They were used in meditation circles for psychic healing, for channeling messages from ascended masters, and for amplifying spiritual energy. The very hardness and clarity of the quartz was interpreted not as evidence of modern tools, but as a sign of its purity and potency as a spiritual antenna. In this new context, asking where a skull came from was missing the point. The important question was what it could do, what secrets it might share, what role it played in the coming planetary shift. A beautiful fiction had taken root, one that was emotionally satisfying and rich with meaning. But fictions, no matter how beautiful, must eventually face the unblinking eye of science. And in a laboratory at the world's most famous museum, that confrontation was being prepared with a tool more powerful than any psychic vision. Meanwhile, the mystical legend of the 13 skulls was spreading like a new religion, but in the quiet halls of serious institutions, a very different kind of faith was at work. It was a faith in evidence, in the power of technology to see what the naked eye could not. The 1990s arrived, bringing with it a revolution in non-destructive scientific analysis. Tools like scanning electron microscopes, which could magnify a surface thousands of times to reveal its microscopic topography, and advanced spectroscopy, which could detect the chemical fingerprint of the tools used to shape an object, were now being applied to archaeology. The crystal skulls, long debated in the realm of story and speculation, were about to be interrogated by light beams and electron scans. A coalition of serious minds decided it was time for a definitive answer. Leading the charge was Jane Walsh, an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., who had become deeply skeptical of the giant skull anonymously mailed to her museum. At the British Museum, Margaret Sachs and her colleagues shared this determination, ready to put their own skull under the microscope once more, but with far more powerful instruments. Even the private trustees of the most famous skull of all, the Mitchell-Hedges, were approached. After decades of basking in the glow of its supernatural reputation, the family agreed with great reluctance to allow a brief, closely supervised scientific examination. The stage was set for a showdown not between people but between paradigms. On one side stood the weight of romantic stories, psychic channelings, and a profound human desire for magical history. On the other stood the cold, impartial gaze of the microscope, a machine that feels no wonder, only records data. This was the moment the mystery would be forced to submit to the rigors of the laboratory. What would the crystal itself confess when questioned by science? The microscope did not see a mystical relic, it saw a workshop. When researchers trained high-powered scanning electron microscopes on the surfaces of the British Museum's skull and others, the crystal finally told its true story. Magnified hundreds of times, the polished facets revealed a landscape of tiny, parallel grooves, all running in the same direction with a perfect mechanical consistency. These were not the chaotic, crisscrossing scratches left by a hand-held stone tool or a piece of sand on a stick. This was the definitive fingerprint of a rotating lapidary wheel, a tool that spins with a steady rhythm, its edge coated with a hard abrasive that cuts the quartz with each revolution. The pattern was as clear as a barcode, and it pointed to one era, the industrial 19th century. Even more damning was the identification of the abrasive itself. Embedded in some of these microscopic grooves, analysts found traces of a synthetic compound called carborundum. This is an artificial abrasive, essentially silicon carbide, that was first invented in the 1890s. Its discovery on a crystal skull is like finding a polyester thread woven into a tapestry claimed to be from the Middle Ages. It is an anachronism, a tiny piece of modern chemistry that utterly shatters the claim of ancient origin. To understand why this is such a smoking gun, we must look at what authentic pre-Columbian crystal work actually looks like. The ancient artisans of Mexico and Central America did carve crystal, creating beautiful beads, small figurines, and ceremonial objects. But their technology was fundamentally different. They used hand-powered drills, essentially a sharp reed or hollow bone spun between the palms, with sand and water as an abrasive. This method creates marks that are irregular, often wobbly, and multi-directional. The resulting surface is matte, not optically clear, because the final polish was achieved with gentle, patient rubbing with fine plant fibers, not a high-speed wheel. When you compare the two under magnification, the difference is unmistakable. One is the product of human muscle and patience, leaving a unique, imperfect signature. The other is the product of a machine-driven process, leaving a repetitive, industrial signature. The evidence from the microscope was not ambiguous. It was a direct, physical confession. The most famous crystal skulls did not come from the temples of the Maya or the altars of the Aztecs. They were born in the workshops of the 19th century, shaped by craftsmen using the advanced tools of their own time, tools that left behind a telltale mark no ancient hand could ever replicate. While the British Museum skull was a work of Victorian artistry, the giant that arrived at the Smithsonian was something else entirely. In the autumn of 1992, a heavy, unmarked package was delivered to the museum's anthropology department. Inside, packed in cotton, was a monstrous skull carved from milky quartz. It weighed over 30 pounds, its features crude and exaggerated, with deep, hollow eye sockets that seemed to glare from a block of cloudy ice. An unsigned note accompanied it, typed on an old-fashioned typewriter. The sender claimed this was an Aztec relic, once owned by the ill-fated Emperor Maximilian of Mexico in the 1860s, and urged the museum to investigate its origins. It felt less like a donation and more like a challenge, a puzzle thrown at the feet of science. Anthropologist Jane Walsh took on the case. Her first instinct was to examine the skull not as a mystical object but as a piece of stoneworking. She noticed its sheer size and weight made it practically unusable for any ritual purpose. It was more of a cumbersome sculpture. Under magnification, the story became clear. The tool marks were the giveaway. Just like its British cousin, the surface of the Smithsonian skull showed the parallel, perfectly straight grooves characteristic of a hard metal wheel spinning at high speed. But there was a twist. The abrasive used here was even more modern. analysis revealed the presence of synthetic aluminum oxide, a compound that only became widely available to lapidary artists in the mid-20th century. This was not a 19th century curiosity, it was a contemporary creation. The stylistic clues confirmed this timeline. The skull's design was a clumsy pastiche, borrowing elements from popular and often inaccurate ideas about Aztec art. It looked like something copied from a picture book rather than inspired by genuine artifacts. Jane Walsh and her team pieced together a compelling new narrative. This skull was likely carved in the 1950s or 60s, not in a Victorian workshop, but in a modern lapidary studio in Mexico or perhaps even Germany, where skilled crystal carvers were abundant. Its intended market was not a museum curator, but a new generation of buyers, those drawn by the burgeoning New Age movement or tourists seeking a dramatic souvenir. It was a modern fake created decades after the Mitchell-Hedges skull entered the spotlight, capitalizing on a mystery that was already well established. The anonymous donor may have hoped the Smithsonian would authenticate it, lending credibility to their possession and skyrocketing its value. Instead, the museum's investigation exposed it as a deliberate and relatively recent fabrication. This giant skull, for all its imposing presence, offered the most honest confession of all. It proved that the allure of the crystal skull legend was so powerful, it was still inspiring artisans to create new fakes a full century after the first ones appeared. But what about the crown jewel, the Mitchell-Hedges skull itself? For decades, its owners fiercely protected its mystical aura, allowing only the most superficial examinations. Scientific access was a privilege rarely granted and always under strict supervision. The family narrative depended on its untouchable perfection, a perfection they argued was proof of its otherworldly origins. They claimed the quartz was of a unique, flawless quality never found in nature, and that under magnification no tool marks whatsoever could be seen. This, they said, was the ultimate evidence. How could modern tools, which must leave a trace, have created something so immaculately smooth? It was a compelling argument built on the very absence of evidence. Yet, even within these tightly controlled conditions, cracks began to appear in the perfect facade. In the early 2000s, a team from the British Museum, including Margaret Sachs, was finally permitted a brief, hands-off examination. Using a simple handheld microscope, they peered at the skull's surface from a respectful distance. What they saw, even under those limited conditions, was telling. In the hard-to-reach interior cavities, like the narrow openings of the nasal cavity and the eye sockets, they spotted the faintest hint of parallel lines. These were not the chaotic scratches of ancient handwork, but the suspiciously regular patterns consistent with a rotating tool. It was not a definitive analysis, but it was a clue, a whisper from the crystal that contradicted the official story. Later, independent experts who analyzed high-resolution photographs noted similar anomalies. The skull's legendary perfection upon extremely close inspection is not quite so absolute. The scientific consensus that has emerged is a profound reversal of the family's claim. Researchers argue that the skull's breathtaking symmetry and optical clarity are not evidence of ancient lost technology, but the exact opposite. That level of flawless perfection is the hallmark of advanced post-industrial lapidary arts. Only the controlled, precise rotation of a powered cutting wheel, developed in the 19th century, could achieve such a uniformly smooth surface and such geometrically perfect features. The ancient method of grinding with sand and a handheld tool simply cannot produce that result. It always leaves a subtly uneven, matte finish. So the very thing that makes the Mitchell-Hedges skull so mesmerizing, its otherworldly smoothness, becomes the strongest clue to its true age. It is a masterpiece, yes, but a masterpiece of the Victorian era, not of Atlantis. The flawless quartz itself presents a perfect alibi. Proponents of the ancient mystery have long pointed to a single, undeniable scientific fact. Rock crystal, the material of the most famous skulls, cannot be dated by any conventional archaeological method. Radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon-14, an isotope found in organic materials like bone, wood, or cloth. Quartz, however, is inorganic, a pure mineral formed under immense heat and pressure over millions of years. It contains no carbon to decay, no internal clock that ticks from the moment it is carved. To the mystery advocate, this is a gift. They argue that since the material itself is geologically ancient, the skulls carved from it could be any age. They could be 10,000 years old, or 500 or 50. The undateable crystal becomes a blank check for imagination, allowing anyone to write in a date that fits their preferred legend. This argument sounds logical, but it contains a critical flaw of category. It confuses the age of the material with the age of the object. Think of it this way. A master sculptor today could acquire a block of marble quarried from the very same mountains that supplied Michelangelo. The marble is 500 million years old, formed in the depths of the ancient earth. The sculptor then uses modern electric tools and diamond-tipped saws to carve a statue of an astronaut. That statue is a modern work of art. The stone is ancient, but the creation is contemporary. The date that matters is not when the stone was formed, but when the artist's tools touched it. The same principle applies to the crystal skulls with absolute precision. The quartz was indeed formed in a geological epoch long before humans walked the earth. But the moment that quartz was shaped into a human skull is a separate event entirely, and that event leaves its own evidence. We do not date the crystal, we date the craftsmanship. The true clock is not in the mineral's atomic structure, but in the microscopic signature of the tools used to shape it. The parallel grooves from a rotating wheel, the presence of synthetic carborundum, the stylistic nods to 19th century anatomical models, these are our dating methods. They tell us not when the earth made the quartz, but when a human hand, guided by a specific technology, turned it into an artifact. This is how archaeology routinely works. We date pottery by its style and the kiln technology used to fire it. We date metalwork by its alloy composition and casting technique. The crystal skulls are not a magical exception, they follow the same rules. Their enduring mystery was never in the undateable stone, but in our willingness to overlook the very dateable marks left upon it. That undateable quartz presents a perfect challenge, but to truly understand it, we must look at what ancient hands were genuinely capable of. The real artisans of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztec, the Mixtec, were masters of sacred stone. They worked with jade, a material even tougher than steel, with obsidian that could be flaked into blades sharper than surgical steel, and yes, with rock crystal. Their creations were not attempts at photographic realism, they were acts of spiritual power. An Aztec death god carved from greenstone is not a portrait, it is a vessel for divine force, its features stark and symbolic. A Maya pendant of a human head in jade is simplified, smoothed by centuries of ritual touch into an icon. These objects feel alive not because they look exactly like us, but because they capture an essence. The technology they used was a testament to immense patience and skill, but it was rooted in the physical world of their time. To shape a block of quartz, an artisan would begin by pecking at it with a hammerstone made of an even harder material, slowly knocking away tiny fragments to rough out a form. For drilling holes, perhaps for a bead or an eye socket, they used a hollow reed or a bone, spinning it between their palms with a slurry of fine sand and water as the abrasive. This is a slow, demanding process where the tool itself wears away as it cuts. For cutting slots or separating pieces, they might employ a technique called string sawing, using a fiber cord pulled back and forth with the same sandy slurry to gradually wear a groove. The results of these methods are unmistakable. Under a microscope, the surfaces they left behind are a landscape of tiny, intersecting scratches, a crisscross pattern of immense effort. The final polish, achieved with gentle rubbing using fine plants or leather, gives a soft, waxy luster, not a brilliant optical shine. And critically, the forms they created respect the limitations of their tools. You see beautiful, intricate beads, stunning mosaic masks assembled from tiny pieces of turquoise and shell, and small, powerful figurines, but you do not see deep, hollowed-out spaces or dramatic undercuts like the perfectly detached jaw of the Mitchell Hedges skull. Such features would be incredibly risky, likely to shatter the crystal during the long, precarious process of carving from the outside in. The ancient aesthetic embraced the solid, the symbolic, the spiritually charged. When you hold a genuine Aztec crystal piece, like a small, translucent bead or a simple carved amulet, you feel the weight of patient labor. It has a tactile, organic quality. Its beauty lies in its spiritual resonance, not in machined precision. This is the crucial baseline. This is what ancient truly looks like. It is magnificent, but it is magnificently human in its scale and its slight imperfections. When we place the famous crystal skulls beside these authentic works, the disconnect is profound. One speaks the language of ritual and symbol, shaped by muscle and sand. The other speaks the language of anatomy and optics, shaped by the steady, relentless spin of a wheel. The skulls do not look like they come from the same artistic tradition, because technologically and philosophically they do not. They are answers to a completely different question, one asked not in a temple, but in a 19th century curiosity shop. This aura of perfection was not the only shield protecting the skull's legend. A far darker, more potent narrative grew around it, one that made scientific questions seem trivial. The Mitchell Hedges artifact became known ominously as the Skull of Doom. According to stories repeated for decades, the skull possessed a malevolent will. It was said to cause mysterious illnesses in those who mocked it. People claimed it could disrupt electronic equipment, making cameras fail and watches stop. The most chilling tales suggested it could even will death, with Anna herself reportedly believing that the skull had been used in ancient rituals to focus lethal psychic energy. These were not just ghost stories, they were presented as evidence of the object's terrifying, supernatural power. But where did these stories actually begin? If we trace them back, their origins are surprisingly recent and personal. The primary source for almost all the doom-laden lore was Anna Mitchell Hedges. In interviews and in her own writings from the 1960s onward, she wove this dark tapestry, speaking of the skull's dangerous reputation and her own respectful fear of it. Later, New Age authors and psychic researchers amplified these anecdotes, adding their own layers of channeled messages and apocalyptic prophecies. The legend of the 13 skulls, for instance, often included a warning that the skulls held great power that could be used for good or ill. This psychological mechanism is fascinating and powerful. By attaching a narrative of danger to the object, its proponents created a brilliant defensive shield. If a skeptic dismissed the skull as a fake, they weren't just disagreeing with a historical claim, they were daring a cursed artifact. More practically, stories of cameras malfunctioning provided a perfect, unfalsifiable excuse for why no one could ever properly document a comprehensive scientific study. Any failed equipment could be blamed on the skull's power, not on poor planning or faulty gear. This aura of forbidden power served two crucial purposes. First, it dramatically enhanced the skull's mystical and market value. An object that is merely old is a museum piece. An object that is dangerous, that holds secret knowledge and demands respect, becomes a relic of immense intrigue. It transforms from an artifact into a character, one with agency and a storied past. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it actively deflected serious scrutiny. To subject the Skull of Doom to a mundane electron microscope scan suddenly feels disrespectful, even foolish. Why risk provoking an ancient power just to satisfy dry academic curiosity? The legend effectively placed the skull beyond the realm of standard archaeology and into the realm of the paranormal, where the rules of evidence are far more flexible. This is how a beautiful piece of 19th century craftsmanship became encased in a 20th century myth of supernatural menace, a story so compelling that for many, it outweighed any physical evidence to the contrary. Science may have found its answers, but the story was far from over. A far more powerful force than any laboratory was already at work, shaping what millions believed to be true. That force was modern storytelling, and its most potent weapon arrived in the summer of 2008. The long-awaited fourth Indiana Jones film, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, did not just feature a crystal skull, it made one the central plot device. The film presented the skull not as a possible fake or a Victorian curio, but as an unequivocal relic of extraterrestrial origin, a psychic conduit to a higher intelligence. For an entire generation, many of whom had never heard of Eugene Boban or scanning electron microscopes, this was their first and most definitive introduction to the subject. The movie cemented a thrilling narrative. Crystal skulls were ancient, alien, and held world-altering power. It wrapped the fringe theory in the irresistible package of a beloved hero's adventure, making the scientifically debunked idea feel exciting, mainstream, and real. This cinematic spectacle was part of a much larger media ecosystem that thrives on mystery. Television documentaries, especially in the early 2000s, played a crucial and often misleading role. Programs dedicated to ancient mysteries or unexplained phenomena would frequently feature the crystal skulls, but they employed a deceptive format known as false balance. They would present a credentialed archaeologist explaining the tool mark evidence for 5 minutes, and then give equal time to a psychic or a proponent of the Atlantis theory describing channeled messages and prophecies. On screen, this created the illusion of a genuine debate, a scientific controversy with two equally valid sides. For the viewer at home, it was profoundly confusing. How could something be so definitively debunked by science, yet still have so many passionate believers on television? The answer lies in the priorities of entertainment. A settled historical fact is boring. An ongoing battle between stuffy scientists and brave truth-seekers is compelling drama. By framing the story as a conflict, these shows gave the myth a longevity it never deserved. Books and websites amplified this effect, creating entire subcultures where the scientific consensus was dismissed as a closed-minded conspiracy. The legend of the 13 skulls became a narrative framework that was endlessly adaptable. It wasn't just history, it was a participatory mystery. People could hunt for skulls, buy modern carvings they believed were ancient, and attend crystal skull workshops to tap into their supposed energy. The myth became self-sustaining, fueled by a human desire for enchantment in a disenchanted world. The actual object became almost irrelevant. What mattered was the role it played in a larger, more exciting story, one of cosmic secrets, impending planetary shifts, and hidden histories. This pop culture life cycle is incredibly resilient. Every few years, a new documentary series or online video recycles the same old footage of the glittering skulls, often without mentioning the carborundum under the microscope or Boban's sales ledger. The beautiful image always outweighs the dry footnote, so we arrive at a strange cultural paradox. In the world of archaeology and material science, the case is closed. The most famous crystal skulls are 19th and 20th century creations, but in the world of popular imagination, the case is more alive than ever. The myth has achieved a kind of immortality, constantly resurrected because it speaks to something deeper than facts. It speaks to our longing for a lost golden age, for magic, and for a universe that is stranger and more wonderful than our textbooks allow. This leaves us with one final, pivotal question. If these objects are not ancient treasures, then what are they really? Their true origin story, once we let go of the fantasy, is in its own way a fascinating glimpse into a different kind of history. The legend endures, but the crystal itself tells a different story. To understand the final truth, we must leave the dusty archives and psychic readings behind and step into a very real, very modern workshop. Today, in places like southern Brazil, the mountainous regions of China, and the historic lapidary centers of Germany, artisans are carving crystal skulls. They are not hidden forgers working in shadowy basements, but skilled craftspeople in well-lit studios, using diamond-coated saws, grinding wheels, and polishing lathes. These tools are the direct descendants of the 19th century technology that shaped the so-called ancient skulls, just refined and powered by electricity instead of steam or a foot pedal. The process is still one of immense patience. A master carver might spend hundreds of hours on a single, high-quality piece, guiding the spinning wheel against the singing quartz, slowly revealing the form within the raw crystal block. The final products are stunning. They range from small, palm-sized trinkets for tourists to large, museum-quality sculptures sold as fine art or spiritual objects for meditation. These contemporary artists sign their work, sell it openly online and in shops, and are proud of their craft. They are not trying to fool anyone. They are creating beautiful objects that speak to a timeless human fascination. This is the ultimate irony that unravels the entire mystery. The famous ancient skulls in London, Paris, and private collections are not relics of a lost world. They are simply the earlier, clandestine output of this same industrial tradition. The only real difference is intent. A modern Brazilian carver sells a skull as a contemporary sculpture for healing or decoration. A century and a half ago, a dealer like Eugene Boban or the anonymous carvers he employed sold an identical object with a fabricated story of Aztec gods and jungle discovery. The tool marks are the same, the material is the same, the only thing that changed was the label. The Mitchell Hedges skull is, in this light, a masterpiece of its true era, the late 1800s. It represents the absolute pinnacle of what a Victorian lapidary artist with emerging industrial tools and a deep understanding of crystal could achieve when aiming for perfection. It was likely commissioned as a unique curiosity for a wealthy collector, a testament to human skill meant to inspire awe, and in that it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The awe simply got redirected into a myth, so we are left with a profound shift in perspective. The crystal skulls are not lies about the past, but they are beautiful truths about human ingenuity, commerce, and our endless need for wonder. They show us how easily a stunning artifact, stripped of its honest origin, can become a blank screen onto which we project our greatest fantasies and deepest fears. Perhaps the most telling clue in this entire mystery is not found under a microscope, but within ourselves. We must confront a simple, powerful question. Why, in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence, do we so desperately want these skulls to be ancient? The answer lies in a deep human longing, one that the cold perfection of crystal perfectly embodies. These objects are more than artifacts, they are mirrors. Their flawless, polished surfaces act as blank quartz screens, and what we see reflected back is not an ancient past, but our own modern hopes and anxieties. We project onto them a yearning for a world filled with more magic and meaning than our own often seems to hold. In a disenchanted age of spreadsheets and satellites, the idea of a lost civilization with crystal computers offers a thrilling escape. It suggests that true wisdom is not something we must build painfully forward into the future, but something we have forgotten, something waiting to be rediscovered just beneath the jungle floor or hidden in a museum vault. This narrative is profoundly comforting. It implies that our ancestors were not primitive but profoundly advanced, possessing secrets of consciousness and technology that we are only now beginning to glimpse. The skull becomes a tangible link to that golden age, a promise that we, too, might one day unlock that lost potential. This desire taps directly into a powerful cultural trope, that of forbidden history. The story goes that mainstream archaeology and stuffy museums are hiding the truth from us, either out of arrogance, ignorance, or a deliberate conspiracy to maintain control over the narrative of human progress. When a museum labels a skull as 19th century, it is not seen as a conclusion based on evidence, but as an act of suppression by an entrenched institution. The very rejection by experts becomes, paradoxically, proof of the artifact's importance to those who crave the alternative. Believing in the skull's ancient mystery becomes an act of rebellion, a way to side with the brave outsider against the closed-minded establishment. It feels more romantic to be an Indiana Jones uncovering a secret truth than a curator filing a report on tool marks. Ultimately, the crystal skulls serve as spiritual Rorschach tests. A person seeking connection to earth energies might use one for meditation, feeling a sense of peace and vibration. A conspiracy theorist might see it as evidence of ancient astronauts. A historian might see a fascinating example of Victorian craftsmanship. The object itself does not change, but the story we tell about it transforms completely based on who is looking. This is the skull's true and enduring power. They are vessels empty of ancient secrets but infinitely full of human need. They satisfy our craving for wonder in a world that often feels thoroughly mapped and explained. Letting go of the myth can feel like a loss, like turning off a beautiful, captivating light. But in doing so, we do not diminish the skulls. We simply begin to see them for what they truly are, and in that truth, there is a different, more human kind of magic entirely. That longing for magic fuels a passionate defense, a community of believers who see the scientific verdict not as a closing statement, but as a challenge to be met. Their counter-arguments form a fascinating tapestry of alternative logic, and to understand the skull's full cultural power, we must listen to these voices with respect. One of the most common claims is a simple and powerful one. Science, they argue, cannot fully explain how these objects were made, even with modern tools. The flawless symmetry of the Mitchell-Hedges skull, the optical purity of the crystal, the intricate undercuts like that detachable jaw. Proponents say replicating this today would be a monumental task for any master carver. They point to the sheer difficulty of working rock crystal, a material prone to shattering along its natural fracture lines. How could a 19th century artisan, they ask, have achieved such perfection without leaving behind mountains of broken attempts? This argument rests on a subtle but important shift. It moves the goalposts from historical evidence to technical difficulty. The fact that something is incredibly hard to do does not mean it is impossible or that it required lost technology. It means it required extraordinary skill, patience, and perhaps a bit of luck. We have documented masterpieces from that era, elaborate crystal chandeliers, intricate engraved vases, and stunning gemstone carvings that demonstrate a level of lapidary artistry that makes a crystal skull a remarkable, but not an impossible, achievement. The absence of documented broken skulls is not proof of alien technology. It is simply a gap in the historical record of a private workshop. Another persistent thread involves the reported psychic properties of the skulls. Many caretakers and visitors describe strange sensations, a feeling of warmth or vibration when touching the crystal, visions or intuitive downloads during meditation, or even the disruption of electronic devices. These personal, subjective experiences are deeply real to those who have them, and they form the core of the skull's spiritual significance for many. From a skeptical standpoint, these phenomena have more to do with human psychology and physiology than with the crystal itself. The power of suggestion is immense. If you approach an object believed for decades to be a powerful psychic amplifier, your mind is primed for an extraordinary experience. The placebo effect is well documented, where belief alone can produce physical sensations. As for electronics malfunctioning, this is an anecdotal claim that has never been reliably demonstrated under controlled conditions. It remains a powerful part of the lore, often used to explain why definitive testing is so hard to arrange, but it does not constitute empirical evidence of supernatural power. Perhaps the most technically nuanced counter-argument addresses the tool marks themselves. Some proponents suggest that the parallel grooves found under microscopes are not from the original carving, but from aggressive cleaning or restoration efforts in the 19th or 20th centuries. They propose that an ancient hand-polished skull could have been later scrubbed with a rotary brush or a powered polishing wheel by a well-meaning but misguided collector, inadvertently imprinting modern marks onto an ancient surface. This is a clever hypothesis as it attempts to reconcile the physical evidence with the desired antiquity. However, materials scientists point out a critical flaw. The microscopic grooves from a rotating tool are not just surface scratches, they are cut into the crystal. They follow the precise contours of the carved form, appearing consistently in the deepest recesses and on the most prominent curves. If these marks were from a later cleaning, they would be more superficial, likely missing the hardest to reach spots, and they would not align so perfectly with the sculpture's anatomy. Furthermore, the discovery of synthetic carborundum, an abrasive invented in the 1890s, embedded within those grooves is the definitive clue. This compound could not have been used to clean an ancient skull because it did not exist when that skull would have been created. Its presence is a birthmark of the modern era, trapped in the crystal at the moment of its shaping. Finally, there is the emotional and philosophical stance that science is simply not equipped to judge such objects. The belief is that the skulls operate on a spiritual or energetic level that our instruments cannot measure. Their true purpose and origin, therefore, lie outside the realm of carbon dating and electron microscopes. This argument is ultimately unassailable by science because it exists in a separate domain of faith. It transforms the skull from an archaeological artifact into a religious or mystical icon. And for those who hold this view, no amount of historical documentation or chemical analysis will ever be relevant because the value of the skull is not in its provenance, but in the personal meaning and connection it provides. This is the heart of the continuing debate. It is less a disagreement about facts and more a clash between two very different ways of knowing the world. One demands testable, physical evidence. The other values subjective experience, intuitive truth, and the possibility of mysteries that defy our current understanding. Both perspectives are deeply human, and recognizing this duality is perhaps the final and most important key to understanding why the crystal skulls continue to captivate us long after the case seems closed to science. The skull sits at the very center of a modern cultural divide. On one side stands a worldview built on faith, intuition, and personal revelation. Here, evidence is not confined to a laboratory report. A vivid dream about the skull's origins, a feeling of energy when holding it, a channeled message from a spirit guide, these subjective experiences are considered valid data, perhaps even more authentic than cold, hard facts. This framework values the power of story, the resonance of myth, and the possibility that some truths are simply beyond the reach of physical measurement. For those in this camp, the skull's true value is not in when it was made, but in what it does, in the meaning and connection it fosters. Its lack of a clear provenance is not a weakness, but a mystery that invites personal interpretation. The scientific dismissal only deepens the conviction that mainstream institutions are blind to deeper realities. This perspective is not about being fooled, it is about prioritizing a different kind of knowing, one that is deeply human and emotionally fulfilling. Confronting this is the meticulous framework of historical and material science. Its rules are strict and impersonal. Evidence must be objective, testable, and reproducible. A tool mark under a microscope is evidence. A sales receipt from Sotheby's is evidence. The chemical signature of a synthetic abrasive is evidence. A personal psychic vision, no matter how powerful for the individual, is not admissible here because it cannot be verified or shared. This methodology is not about extinguishing wonder, It is a disciplined attempt to filter out noise and bias to understand what physically happened. It asks concrete questions. Who made this, with what tools, for what market? When the answers point to 19th century workshops, the case is considered closed, regardless of how beautiful or emotionally charged the object may be. The two sides are not just disagreeing on a conclusion, they are operating with entirely different rule books for what constitutes truth. One seeks emotional and spiritual resonance. The other seeks verifiable, contextual fact. This is why the debate often feels so frustrating, with each side talking past the other. A scientist pointing to carborundum particles sees a definitive refutation. A believer hears a narrow-minded fixation on minutiae that misses the skull's spiritual essence. The believer's recounting of a profound meditation experience is to them undeniable proof of the skull's power. To the scientist, it is an interesting anecdote about human psychology, but irrelevant to the question of historical origin. They are having two different conversations on the same stage. The crystal skulls become a perfect case study in this modern conflict because they are objects of exquisite beauty that literally reflect whatever world you bring to them. They force us to ask a foundational question. When we say something is true, what do we actually mean? Are we describing an objective event in history, or are we describing a personal, transformative experience? Can both be true in their own realms? Our digital age has magnified this divide exponentially. Online, communities of belief can form and strengthen in echo chambers, sharing personal testimonials and alternative research that reinforce their views, often untroubled by countervailing evidence from outside their circle. The very ambiguity of the skulls, that undateable quartz, becomes their greatest asset in this space, allowing for endless speculation and narrative building. The scientific consensus, meanwhile, is often seen as just another story, one told by an establishment with its own biases and blind spots. In this environment, the most compelling narrative often wins, not the one with the most physical evidence. The enduring allure of the crystal skulls, therefore, is not really about archaeology at all. It is a mirror held up to our own time, revealing a deep societal tension between the heart's truths and the microscope's facts, and showing how desperately we seek objects that can somehow bridge that gap. So where does this leave us, with a beautiful lie or a complicated truth? The legacy of the crystal skulls is a double-edged blade of quartz, cutting both ways through our relationship with the past. On one side, there is undeniable harm. When a modern fabrication is presented as an ancient relic, it actively distorts our understanding of history. It inserts a fictional object into the real archaeological record, forcing scholars to waste time and resources debunking it instead of studying genuine artifacts. More insidiously, it fuels dangerous pseudo-historical narratives. The idea that indigenous cultures of the Americas could not have built their own magnificent cities, that they needed help from Atlanteans or aliens, is a colonial trope dressed in New Age glitter. It strips these sophisticated civilizations of their own genius, suggesting their real achievements are not impressive enough. This narrative, often unintentionally, diminishes the true wonder of Maya astronomy and Aztec engineering by replacing it with science fiction. And then there is the very real risk of financial exploitation. In the shadows of the legitimate art market, fake skulls with forged provenances are sold for small fortunes to unsuspecting collectors, a straightforward scam wrapped in spiritual promise. Yet, to dismiss the entire phenomenon as merely harmful misses its profound cultural resonance. For many, a crystal skull was not a barrier to learning but a gateway. That initial spark of wonder from a movie or a book led some to dive deeper to discover the authentic histories of the Olmec, the Toltec, and the Maya. The fictional mystery became a stepping stone to real and equally fascinating archaeological wonders. The skulls have also inspired incredible art, from the original 19th century carvers to contemporary sculptors who continue to explore the form with honesty about its modern creation. They are touchstones in popular culture, symbols that instantly communicate mystery and adventure, and we cannot discount the simple human joy of a good story. The legend of the 13 Skulls, for all its factual flaws, is a compelling myth about hope and global unity, a narrative that provides meaning and connection for its believers. This brings us to the final personal question. Does knowing the truth that these are stunning works of 19th century art spoil all the fun, or could that knowledge actually deepen our appreciation? The magic does not have to vanish when the fantasy is understood, it simply transforms. Instead of marveling at a fictional lost technology, we can marvel at the very real, painstaking skill of a Victorian artisan who spent a year of their life coaxing a human likeness from unforgiving stone. Instead of seeing a cursed object of doom, we can see a fascinating artifact of its true time, a product of colonial curiosity markets, romanticism about the exotic, and the dawn of industrial toolmaking. Its story is no longer about ancient priests, but about explorers, dealers, collectors, and the timeless human desire to own a piece of the mysterious. That story is rich, complex, and entirely true. The skulls are not portals to Atlantis, but they are perfect mirrors of our own era, reflecting our endless capacity for creativity, for commerce, and for wonder. In the end, they remind us that the most captivating mysteries are not always about where an object came from, but why we so desperately need it to be magic. That unresolved tension between faith and fact finds its physical home in museums and private collections today. So where do these iconic objects reside now, and what stories do their caretakers tell about them? The journey of each skull has settled into a new, more honest chapter. The Mitchell Hedges skull, the star of so much legend, remains in private hands. It is owned by the family trust and spends most of its time in secure storage, a glittering treasure removed from public view. It does make occasional, dramatic appearances at crystal healing workshops or New Age conferences, where it is still revered as a powerful spiritual artifact. Its narrative there remains one of ancient mystery and psychic power, a story preserved in amber by those who choose to believe. The object itself is unchanged, but its context is entirely curated by faith. In stark contrast, the skulls that passed through Eugene Bobin's shop now reside under the clinical lights of major institutions, and their labels tell a very different tale. The British Museum skull sits in its gallery, no longer presented as an Aztec god of death. Its identification plaque is a model of careful revision. It states the object is made of rock crystal and then delivers the quiet verdict, probably European, 19th century. It is displayed not as a relic of a lost world, but as a fascinating artifact of its own era, a testament to Victorian lapidary skill and the complex market for curiosities. Its companion in Paris at the Musée du Quai Branly shares a similar fate, catalogued with a provenance that honestly traces back to Bobin, its ancient claims gently set aside. These museums have not hidden the skulls away in shame. Instead, they have recontextualized them, transforming them from archaeological mysteries into historical documents of a different kind. Perhaps the most honest display of all belongs to the giant. The Smithsonian's massive crystal skull is not tucked away in a storage basement. It is proudly on public view, but its setting is profoundly revealing. It forms a centerpiece in an exhibit about archaeological fraud and forgery. The skull is displayed alongside other clever fakes, from ancient-looking maps to suspicious pottery, as part of an educational display on how to spot a counterfeit. Its label does not mince words. It explains the tool mark evidence, discusses the anachronistic abrasives, and outlines the likely motive behind its creation. Here, the skull is celebrated not for what it falsely claimed to be, but for what it truly is, a masterclass in deception and a perfect teaching tool for understanding the difference between genuine history and manufactured myth. This is where the journey of evidence ultimately leads not to destruction or denial, but to a clearer, more nuanced understanding. these objects have not been banished. They have been reassigned, their roles recast from mysterious protagonists to informative witnesses in the long, complicated human drama of how we create our own past. The crystal skulls leave behind a legacy far greater than the objects themselves. They teach a masterclass in how we uncover the past, a set of principles that protect us from the siren song of a beautiful lie. The first and most critical lesson is the paramount importance of provenance. In archaeology, provenance is not just a fancy word for origin. It is the object's life story, a documented chain of custody from the moment it leaves the ground to the moment it enters a museum case. Think of it as a passport for an artifact stamped with dates, locations, and names. A strong provenance provides context, linking the object to a specific culture, time, and place. The crystal skulls, in stark contrast, arrived with almost none. Their stories began at the point of sale, with tales of jungle discoveries or anonymous donations, but the pages before that moment were blank. This absence of a clear, verifiable history was the first red flag, a warning that the most compelling part of their story was also the part that could not be verified. When an object's past is shrouded in mystery, it becomes a blank screen, and it is all too easy to project our wildest fantasies onto it. Provenance forces an object to account for its journey, and without that accountability, myth rushes in to fill the void. Solving this kind of historical puzzle is never the work of a single expert gazing into a crystal ball. The definitive answers about the skulls came from a chorus of disciplines, each bringing a different instrument to the investigation. Geology told us about the crystal itself, its formation and properties. Microscopy, from the simple hand lens of a 1930s curator to the powerful scanning electron microscopes of today, revealed the microscopic handwriting of the tools. Art history provided the stylistic analysis, comparing the skull's aesthetic to genuine pre-Columbian carvings and to 19th century anatomical models. Chemistry identified the synthetic abrasives trapped in the grooves. This interdisciplinary approach is how modern archaeology works. It is a collaborative detective story where the geologist, the materials scientist, and the historian compare notes, each piece of evidence cross-checked against the others. The skulls did not fall to just one field of study, they were surrounded by it. This methodical, multi-angled scrutiny is what separates rigorous inquiry from speculative fascination. It ensures that no single piece of evidence, no matter how compelling, is taken as the whole truth until it is corroborated by another, completely different line of inquiry. The skulls also belong to a notorious category of objects that have long tantalized fringe theorists, often called OOP arts or out-of-place artifacts. These are items that, at first glance, appear too advanced or too anomalous for the time and culture they are attributed to. A metal object in a prehistoric tomb, a complex gear mechanism in an ancient shipwreck, or a flawless crystal skull in a Maya ruin. The initial shock value is powerful. It seems to overturn everything we know, to suggest lost civilizations or visitor from the stars. But this is almost always an illusion born from a shallow reading of history. The OOP art label itself is a judgment, one that assumes we already fully understand the capabilities of past peoples. What we often find upon deeper investigation is not a historical impossibility, but a reflection of our own ignorance or underestimation. The crystal skulls were deemed OOP arts because their perfection seemed impossible for ancient hands. The deeper truth was that we were underestimating the incredible skill of 19th century lapidary artists, not overestimating ancient ones. True OOP arts are exceedingly rare because human history is vast, creative, and still full of surprises that fit within its own technological evolution. The lesson here is to be deeply skeptical of any artifact whose primary evidence for existing is that it supposedly could not exist. This leads us to the golden rule of skeptical inquiry, a principle famously championed by astronomer Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, The claim that the Mitchell-Hedges skull was a 13,000-year-old computer from Atlantis is about as extraordinary as it gets. The evidence offered in support was a gripping story of personal discovery and subjective feelings of mystical energy. These are ordinary forms of evidence perfectly suitable for ordinary claims. But for a claim that rewrites the history of human technology and civilization, the evidence must be of a different magnitude entirely. It must be physical, verifiable, and reproducible. It must withstand the same scrutiny we apply to any historical assertion. The proponents of the ancient skull theory had a captivating narrative, but narrative is not evidence. A good story and a true story are not the same thing. Our brains are wired to love a good story, to connect with its emotional beats and memorable characters. This is why the tale of Anna finding the skull on her birthday is so enduring. It feels true because it is satisfying, but the truth is often messier, less cinematic, and found in the dry details of an auction catalogue or the parallel lines on a microscope slide. The Crystal Skull saga, in the end, is a powerful reminder to cherish our capacity for wonder, but to temper it with a disciplined respect for evidence. It teaches us to ask not just what an object makes us feel, but what it can actually prove. The journey ends not in a temple of Atlantis, but in a workshop of the industrial age. The evidence carved into the quartz itself tells a consistent and undeniable story. These iconic crystal skulls are not ancient Mesoamerican relics. They are exquisite works of 19th and early 20th century art, masterpieces of patience and skill from a specific moment in human history. They were born from a potent mix of antiquarian entrepreneurship, technical innovation, and our timeless hunger for a good story. Dealers like Eugene Boban supplied a market hungry for the exotic, and skilled lapidary artists, using the new power of rotating wheels and synthetic abrasives, delivered objects of breathtaking beauty that could carry any legend buyers wished to believe. Their power was never in their antiquity, but in their ambiguity, a blank screen of crystal onto which we have projected our deepest fantasies of lost worlds and cosmic secrets. So their true value, their lasting legacy, lies not in a false ancient past, but in the remarkably true story they tell about us. They are mirrors of our modern fascination with the unknown, reflecting a human desire for enchantment that is so powerful, it can transform a Victorian curiosity into a vessel for prophecy. This is the real magic of the crystal skulls, a magic woven from human ingenuity, commerce, and wonder. It is a story more fascinating than any myth because it is real. And it leaves us with a final, compelling question. What other captivating mysteries do you want to see investigated with this same careful balance, this blend of open-minded curiosity and rigorous evidence-based scrutiny? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this historical detective work, please like this video and subscribe for more journeys to the truth behind the legend.